At the Riverside Police Department, chaos erupts when two officers handcuff a black man in uniform, laughing, mocking him, calling him a fraud. But when their captain rushes out, his face turns white, because the man they just arrested isn't an imposter. He's their new chief of police. And what happens next leaves the entire station in stunned silence. At precisely 8:45 a.m., the front doors swung open. A tall black man stepped in, wearing a crisp light blue uniform, his cap tucked neatly under one arm, and a sleek black briefcase in his other hand. His eyes, calm but watchful, swept across the lobby. His badge gleamed faintly, but the insignia on his chest wasn't one the desk officers immediately recognized. "Can I help you?" said Officer Daniels, a stout, confident white cop with 12 years on the force and a habit of judging people before they spoke. The man nodded slightly. "Yes, I'm here to meet with Captain Rowley. Could you let him know Chief Jordan has arrived?" Daniels frowned, the title echoing awkwardly in his head. "Chief Jordan?" he repeated suspiciously. "We don't have a black chief. You must be mistaken. ID, please." The man calmly opened his briefcase and began pulling out a document folder. But before he could even finish, Daniels had already motioned to another officer. "Hey, Ryan, come over here. We've got a situation." Officer Ryan, taller and equally dismissive, approached with a grin. "Let me guess. Some guy thinks he's important?" The man didn't flinch. He simply handed over a sealed letter. "You'll find my credentials inside. It's an official notice from the mayor's office." Ryan barely glanced at it before rolling his eyes. "Sure, buddy, and I'm the president." A couple of clerks nearby chuckled nervously, unsure whether to intervene. The front desk sergeant watched but stayed silent. He'd seen this play out too many times. "Listen, sir," Daniels said firmly, stepping closer. "You can't just walk in here claiming to be the chief. Either you show a valid ID or you leave before this becomes an issue." The man's jaw tightened slightly. "I suggest you read the letter before making assumptions." But Daniels's pride had already taken over. "Hands where I can see them," he snapped, his voice loud enough to turn heads across the station. A tense hush fell. Officers began peering over their desks, whispers rippling through the room. The man slowly raised his hands, still calm, still composed, like someone who'd seen worse storms. "Sir, I mean no disrespect," he said evenly, "but you're making a mistake." "Yeah?" Daniels muttered, pulling out his cuffs. "We'll see about that." The click of steel echoed through the hall as Daniels roughly grabbed the man's wrist and locked the cuffs in place. Gasps followed. Some young recruits looked uneasy. One whispered, "Why's he arresting a fellow officer?" But Daniels didn't care. "Let this be a lesson," he barked to the room. "Uniform or not, you don't fake authority here." The man knelt slightly as the cuffs tightened. His briefcase slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. Inside, the official city seal stamped on an envelope peeked out, unnoticed by everyone. The door to the captain's office opened then. Captain Rowley, a seasoned officer with grey at his temples, stepped out mid-conversation and froze at the sight. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. Daniels straightened. "Sir, this man was impersonating a—" Rowley's eyes went wide. "Impersonating? Daniels, take those cuffs off him right now!" The entire station fell silent. Daniels blinked. "Sir?" "That man," Rowley said, pointing firmly, "is Chief Marcus Jordan, the new head of this department." Daniels' face drained of color. The laughter, the arrogance, the mockery, all turned to dust in his throat. The man looked up slowly, his voice calm but heavy. "Now that we've cleared that up, Officer Daniels," he said, "perhaps you'd like to explain why your first instinct toward a fellow officer was force, not respect." The air grew thick. Every eye in the room was on him. Daniels stammered, "Yes, sir. I didn't know—" "That's the problem," Jordan interrupted quietly. "You didn't ask. You just assumed." And as he stood, the cuffs still gleaming around his wrists, the new chief's presence filled the room like thunder before a storm. Rowley's order cut through the silence. "Unlock him. Now." Daniels fumbled for his keys, his hands trembling. But as the cuffs came off, Chief Jordan simply said, "No need to apologize. I'll see you in the conference room in 10 minutes. All of you." And with that, he picked up his briefcase and walked past them, leaving behind a room full of officers realizing that the man they'd mocked seconds ago now held the power to decide all their futures. 10 minutes later, every officer in the Riverside Police Department stood gathered in the main conference room, a rectangular space lined with framed photographs of past chiefs and commendation plaques gleaming under the fluorescent lights. But today, Those walls bore silent witness to shame. The tension was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Officers avoided each other's eyes. Even the usual chatter about coffee or weekend plans had died out. They had just handcuffed the man now standing at the head of the table, the new chief of police. Chief Marcus Jordan stood tall, his light blue uniform now perfectly pressed again, the black briefcase open before him. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't even frowning. His calm composure made the silence feel heavier. Captain Rowley cleared his throat awkwardly. "Chief, on behalf of the department—" Jordan raised a hand, stopping him. "No, Captain, they don't need you to speak for them." His tone was steady, commanding without aggression. "They need to listen." He glanced around the room, his gaze pausing on Daniels and Ryan, both of whom looked ready to sink into the floor. "Before I start this meeting," Jordan said, "let me ask a simple question. What do you see when a black man walks through your doors in uniform?" No one answered. Jordan took a slow breath. "You see what your biases tell you to see, not the badge, not the record, not the man." He tapped his chest lightly. "You see color. And when color leads, respect fades." Officer Daniels shifted uneasily. "Sir, I didn't mean to—" "I know what you meant," Jordan interrupted softly. "You meant to protect this station. But protection doesn't mean humiliation. It doesn't mean judgment before understanding." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. Personnel reports, misconduct files, internal complaints. In the last 3 years, this department has logged more racial bias complaints than any other in the state. That's not something to ignore. The officers exchanged glances, the truth cutting deep. "I've read every file," Jordan continued, "and I've noticed a pattern. The same names, the same excuses, the same silence from those who know better but stay quiet." His gaze turned toward the senior officers. "The silence of good men is what allows bad behavior to grow." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some officers looked genuinely remorseful. Others looked defensive. Jordan's eyes softened slightly as he continued. "I didn't come here to punish anyone. I came here because I believe this department can be better. But change doesn't start with policy, it starts with humility." He stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and the group. "You all saw me walk in this morning and made assumptions. You saw a man who didn't fit your picture of authority, but let me tell you something. I've worn this badge longer than most of you have been in uniform. I've served in Detroit, Chicago, and Atlanta. I've seen good cops lose their way because pride became more important than purpose." The room was silent except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Jordan leaned against the table, his voice low but powerful. "You think wearing this badge makes you superior, but it should make you humble. Because this badge doesn't represent power, it represents service, and service starts with respect, no matter what color stands before you." He let the words settle before adding, "Daniels, I'm not here to ruin your career. I'm here to make sure what happened today never happens again, to anyone. Because next time, it might not end with embarrassment. It might end with tragedy." Daniels swallowed hard, eyes wet with guilt. "Sir, I understand." Jordan nodded. "Good, then prove it. Starting today, this department will undergo a complete ethics and inclusion retraining. Every officer, every rank, including me." Rowley looked surprised. "Even you, Chief?" "Yes," Jordan replied simply. "Because leadership means setting the standard, not standing above it." For a moment, his gaze softened, glancing toward a young Latina officer standing near the back. "What's your name?" "Officer Ramirez, sir." "Ramirez," he said, "I read your file. You filed a complaint last year about being talked over during a briefing. It was dismissed. That stops now. From this day forward, no voice in this building gets ignored." Her eyes glistened. "Thank you, Chief." Jordan nodded and looked around the room once more. "If anyone here thinks this department doesn't need change, I suggest you hand in your badge now. Because the Riverside Police Department I intend to lead will not tolerate prejudice, arrogance, or silence in the face of either." He closed his briefcase with a firm click, signaling the end of his address. "Dismissed." The officers hesitated, unsure whether to move or apologize. One by one, they quietly left the room, their pride fractured, but their conscience awakened. Daniels lingered last. As he passed by Jordan, he stopped. "Chief, I'm sorry. I judged you before I even saw you." Jordan met his eyes. "Then you've already taken your first step toward being a better cop." Daniels nodded, shoulders heavy but changed. As the door shut behind the last officer, Captain Rowley turned to Jordan. "You handled that with grace, Chief. Most men would have demanded suspension or worse." Jordan exhaled, looking out the window at the grey skyline. "Discipline fixes behavior, Captain, but only dignity changes hearts." And with that, he placed his hands behind his back. the faint reflection of the American flag shining on the window glass, a reminder of the ideals he was determined to restore. That evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Chief Marcus Jordan stood alone in his new office. The blinds were half drawn, casting striped shadows across the polished floor. On the desk lay his briefcase, now open beside a framed photo of his late father, also a police officer, one of the first black sergeants in their hometown of Atlanta. Marcus stared at the photo for a long moment. His father's words echoed in his mind. "Son, the badge can shine on your chest, but its true weight rests on your heart. Never forget who you wear it for." He sighed deeply. The day had been long, and though he had handled it with composure, the sting of that morning still lingered. Being handcuffed in front of dozens of officers wasn't just humiliating, it was a reminder of the very struggle he'd spent years fighting to change. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," Marcus said, straightening his posture. Captain Rowley stepped inside, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said, setting one down. Marcus smiled faintly. "You read my mind." They sat quietly for a moment, then Rowley spoke, his tone hesitant. "Chief, I've been in this department for 30 years. I've seen plenty of changes, good and bad, but what I saw today, it wasn't just about bias, it was about fear." Marcus turned to him. "Fear?" Rowley nodded. "Yes. Some of these men, they don't even realize they're afraid. Afraid of losing control, of being held accountable, of admitting they're wrong. That fear turns into arrogance, and arrogance turns into bad policing." Marcus took a slow sip of his coffee, letting the thought sink in. "Then we'll start by addressing that fear. We'll replace it with understanding and accountability." Rowley leaned back. "You really think that's possible here?" Marcus's gaze hardened. "It has to be." He walked toward the window, overlooking the glowing streets of Riverside. "You know, I didn't come here because it was easy. The mayor wanted someone who could clean up this department's image. But I told her I wasn't here for image. I'm here for integrity. That means no shortcuts, no politics, just truth." Rowley nodded slowly. "Truth might make you enemies." Marcus smiled faintly. "Then I'll know I'm doing something right." For a moment, silence hung between them, comfortable, heavy with mutual respect. Then the intercom buzzed. The receptionist's voice came through. "Chief, there's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent." Marcus exchanged a glance with Rowley. "Send them in." The door opened, and Officer Daniels stepped inside, holding a folder. His expression was nervous but sincere. "Chief Jordan," he began, "I know it's late. I just needed to say something in person." Marcus gestured for him to continue. "I reviewed my body cam footage from this morning," Daniels said quietly. "I wanted to see what I missed, and I realized everything. The way I spoke, the way I assumed, the way I looked at you. It wasn't who I thought I was. I always told myself I wasn't biased. But watching that clip, I saw it clear as day." Marcus listened without interruption. Daniels continued, voice trembling slightly. "I wanted to hand in a written apology, not because you asked for one, but because I need to hold myself accountable." He extended the folder toward him. Marcus took it but didn't open it. "Daniels, I appreciate that, but the real apology isn't on paper. It's in how you act moving forward." Daniels nodded. "I understand, sir. I just wanted you to know. I'll do better." Marcus smiled gently. "That's all I ask. Learn, grow, lead differently than you did this morning." Daniels hesitated, then added, "Chief, I also wanted to thank you. If someone did to me what I did to you, I don't think I'd have been this calm. You could have ended my career today." Marcus shook his head. "And what good would that do? Ending your career doesn't change the system, changing you does." Daniels's eyes lowered. "You've changed how I see this badge." Marcus placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Then wear it right from now on." Daniels nodded and quietly left the room, leaving Marcus and Rowley alone once more. Rowley smiled faintly. "You've already started changing hearts, Chief." Marcus exhaled. "One at a time, Captain, one at a time." He turned back toward his desk, finally opening the folder Daniels had left behind. Inside, alongside the apology letter, was a small note. "I grew up thinking leadership was about power. Today, I learned it's about restraint. Thank you for teaching me that lesson." Marcus stared at the words for a long time. His father's voice echoed again in his mind. "Change doesn't come with anger, son. It comes with example." The city lights shimmered outside the window as Marcus placed the letter beside his father's photo. The badge glinted in the reflection, reminding him that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also perhaps new beginnings. And for the first time since walking through those doors, Chief Marcus Jordan allowed himself to smile, not with pride, but with purpose. The following morning, the Riverside Police Department buzzed with a different kind of energy. The air felt lighter, though the memories of yesterday's embarrassment still lingered in every corner. Word had already spread across the city. New chief handcuffed by his own officers. Local media outlets were swarming outside, hungry for a headline. But inside, Chief Marcus Jordan had something else planned. Not revenge, not damage control, but transformation. At exactly 9 a.m., a department-wide meeting was called in the Central Hall. Over 100 officers, veterans, rookies, and administrators alike gathered under the tall emblem of the American flag. The sound of murmurs quieted as Chief Jordan stepped forward to the podium, his calm authority commanding silence. He looked across the room, his eyes meeting faces both ashamed and curious. "Yesterday," he began, "wasn't just an unfortunate incident. It was a mirror, one that reflected exactly what's broken in law enforcement today." A murmur swept through the hall, but Marcus continued firmly. "Too often, we react before we understand. We assume before we ask. We use power before we use respect. And that's not policing, that's pride in uniform." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "But today," he said, his voice softening, "we begin rewriting that story." Behind him, a large screen flickered to life, displaying a new initiative titled Project Unity. The subtitle read, "Restoring Trust, Rebuilding Character, Redeeming the Badge." Marcus continued, "This program will become the foundation of every officer's journey in this department. It will train not just your hands, but your hearts. It will remind us all that authority without empathy is dangerous, and that every uniform carries a promise, not a privilege." The room remained silent, captivated. Captain Rowley stepped forward, handing Marcus a folder. "Chief, these are the volunteer sign-ups you requested. You might want to see this." Marcus opened it, and his eyes widened. Every single officer in the department had signed up for the retraining. Even Daniels and Ryan, the two men who had cuffed him, were listed first. A rare smile crossed his face. "Well," he said, glancing toward the audience, "it looks like we're finally walking the talk." The crowd shifted uneasily, then slowly, one by one, applause began to rise. It wasn't loud at first, but it carried something genuine, something new. Then, unexpectedly, Officer Daniels stepped forward. "Chief," he called out, voice steady, "permission to address the department." Marcus nodded. Daniels turned to his peers, his face solemn but determined. "Yesterday I was the one who handcuffed this man. I thought I was doing my duty, protecting this department, but what I really did was dishonor it." He took a deep breath. "I judged a man before I knew him, and I embarrassed not just him but every one of us who wears this badge. I can't undo it, but I can promise this. I'll be the first to change." The room fell still. Several officers lowered their heads in reflection. Marcus stepped closer and placed a firm hand on Daniel's shoulder. "And that," he said, "is what leadership looks like. Accountability." The applause that followed this time was thunderous. It wasn't for the chief alone. It was for the moment of reckoning that every officer in that room felt deep in their chest. When the noise settled, Marcus addressed them once more. "I want you to remember something," he said. "Every single time you put on that badge, you're not just representing authority, you're representing trust. The community doesn't need us to be heroes. They need us to be human. That's where respect begins." He gestured toward the department's motto engraved on the wall, "To protect and serve." "That's not just a slogan," he said. "It's a promise, one that starts today, with each of you." As the officers stood in silence, processing his words, Marcus stepped down from the podium and walked through the crowd. Officers moved aside, standing taller, nodding in respect. For the first time since his arrival, he wasn't just their superior, he was their leader. Outside the station, the press waited eagerly. Cameras flashed as the front doors opened. Chief Jordan stepped into the sunlight, surrounded by his officers, Daniels on one side, Rowley on the other. Reporters shouted questions, microphones reached forward. One reporter asked, "Chief Jordan, how do you respond to the video of your own officers handcuffing you on your first day?" Marcus paused, his expression calm. "I see it as a lesson," he said, "not just for Riverside, but for every department in this country. We all make mistakes. What matters is how we grow from them." Another reporter asked, "Do you plan to discipline the officers involved?" Marcus smiled faintly. "They've already faced the toughest discipline, seeing themselves in the mirror of their own actions, but they'll also be part of the solution." He turned toward his team and added, "Because redemption doesn't start with punishment, it starts with change." The cameras clicked wildly, but for Marcus Jordan it wasn't about headlines. It was about healing. Later that afternoon, he stood once more in his office, watching as his officers left for community outreach, visiting schools, senior homes, and local shelters as part of Project Unity's first mission. The same station that had once mocked him now carried his vision. And as he gazed at the fading sunlight glinting off the department badge hanging on his wall, he whispered to his father's memory, "You were right, Dad. The badge is heavy, but today it feels worth it." With that, Chief Marcus Jordan turned off the lights and stepped out of his office, leaving behind not just a building, but the beginning of a legacy.